So, why doesn't Clara and 12 encounter echoes of her? They do actually. In a comic called Blood and Ice, Clara encounters an echo of herself called Winnie, who is living life as an Arctic explorer, and her and the Doctor kind of realise that the Clara echoes weren't just splinters of Clara, but they were people who went on to have their own lives. Now, this isn't exactly on topic, but I wanted to talk about the incredibly confusing nature of the 12th Doctor's timeline, and this is a great transition into it. I have to direct to a board now because it gets very confusing. So, the events of Doctor Who as we see them are Asylum of the Daleks, the Snowmen, the Bells of St. John, Name of the Doctor. Obviously, all of like the other stuff happens here. Before the events of Name of the Doctor dies on Trenzalore, meaning that his timeline is there for Clara to jump in, to go back here, and be all of these splinters, so that the Doctor meets these two, which sets him on the journey to that, which sets him onto the journey to that, which sets, it's to some extent a bootstrap paradox. So it looks something like this. However, at the end of Time of the Doctor, Clara literally says to the Time Lord, help him change the future. So instead of dying on Trenzalore, the Doctor is granted the new regeneration cycle. So now the Doctor shoots off and he becomes 12, and these events, they must have still happened in order for all of this stuff to happen to get to here, but they're happening in a different timeline now. We now live on this timeline. But this is confusing. Day of the Doctor. Because 12 shows up in Day of the Doctor to help them save Gallifrey, it implies the calculations weren't complete when 11 was doing these events. They were only complete when 12 does. So 12 is the one with the final calculations that save Gallifrey, which means the Time Lords would have had to change the future to get 12 to exist so that he could go back to Day of the Doctor. So it's a bootstrap within a bootstrap. So one way you could interpret it is this, in that saving Gallifrey creates a new timeline where the Doctor still ends up on Trenzalore, but he was always going to regenerate into 12. And, again, this still happened because of all this, but clearly at some point a new timeline came in. That's the way I interpret it, because in my mind, there are actually three timelines at work, because the moment says that the 10 and 11 are, is who the Doctor will become if the Doctor destroys Gallifrey. So, the adventure we see has to have happened so that in the original timeline, the Doctor destroys Gallifrey, regenerates into 9, becomes 10, becomes 11, Asylum of the Daleks, Bells of St. John, Doctor dies on Trenzalore, Name of the Doctor, blah, 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 blah. So, by the moment bringing the War Doctor 10 and 11 together, that creates a point up here at Day of the Doctor, which creates the new timeline, meaning that 12 had to have always existed, because he goes back to do the events of Day of the Doctor, and Doctor Who timelines are so confusing.